This director uses real tragedy to make his movies scarier.
So there's this guy who had a rough life, but he loves making horror movies. And when I say rough, I mean it. He's gone through some real tragedy. But instead of letting it ruin his life and determine his outcome, he's used it as motivation to continue making great horror movies. His first 3 did decent, but his 4th one blew up and made over $100 million. And I think I've figured out his secret. The guy I'm talking about is Oz Perkins, and he is a real one. Before I jump into this video, I gotta do the obligatory Patreon shout out, so please listen to it. There's 2 cuts of this video. The director's cut is uncut. It has all the footage, all the music, all the swearing, and no ads. The theatrical cut is still awesome, but it's cut down because of YouTube's copyright ID situation. The Patreon is linked in the description and the pinned comment, and even if you don't want to give me $4, you should definitely follow it because I post there a lot and I basically use it as a notification system for new videos. It's worth checking out. So with that out of the way, let's jump into the video. If there's one person who was born to make horror movies, it is Oz Perkins. First of all, his dad was Anthony Perkins, the guy who played Norman Bates in the original Psycho and a lot of sequels, and his mom was a model, an actress, a Hollywood starlet. Basically, her job was to be famous. But even though he was primed to have this great life from the very beginning because his parents were as close to Hollywood royalty as you could get, his life is full of tragedy. His parents did stay together up until his dad's death, but they hid a pretty major secret from their kids up until his dad died. So despite the fact that he was married to a woman, his dad was actually a closeted gay man, and they chose to hide that from their kids because it wasn't nearly as accepted back then as it is now. And on top of that, his dad contracted AIDS, which would eventually kill him. And that's already bad enough, but things would continue to get harder because just a few years later, his mom would die when she boarded a plane from Los Angeles to New York City on September 11th, 2001. I'll let you put that one together so I don't get flagged by YouTube, but it's pretty easy to figure out what happened. So knowing all of that, I kind of figured he'd be cynical, he'd be bitter, he'd be downtrodden, he'd hold a lot of contempt for the cards he'd been dealt in life. But after watching interviews with Oz Perkins, he's genuinely hilarious and he has a shockingly positive outlook on life. And I guess that really shouldn't have been surprising considering that whole stereotype where the people who go through the biggest tragedies in life are usually the funniest people. Like all of my friends who have gone through the worst stuff are the funniest, but it really was surprising to me to see that. But even with all the turmoil that the world of Hollywood inflicted upon him throughout his life, he did not shy away from movies at all. In fact, he dove right in. His first acting role was an awesome one. He played a young version of Norman Bates in Psycho 2, and then later on in life, he would be in some pretty big comedies like Legally Blonde and Not Another Teen Movie. But even though he found success in the comedy genre, this dude was absolutely built to make horror movies. If I've learned anything so far on this channel, it's that every director has a different story when it comes to their path to Hollywood, but Oz Perkins, his is really different. If you go by release dates, his first movie was I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. I can't believe I remembered that stupidly long title. It dropped on Netflix in 2016. I remember it generating a little bit of buzz at the time, but if I gotta be honest, I didn't really like it. His second movie came out in 2017. It's called The Black Coat's Daughter, but he actually filmed that one first, and it would provide the template for how hard this dude was going to have to work in the future to get his movies made. He wrote it way back in 2012 and immediately started shopping it around, but even though he had a big leg up by being the son of 2 famous people in Hollywood, nobody wanted to give him money to make this movie. It wasn't that people didn't like it though, or didn't think it was good. He actually showed it to a lot of people and they all essentially said the same thing. Wow, this movie is great. We cannot make it. But he didn't give up. He decided to get crafty about it and figured that if he cast some big well-known names, it would make it easier to sell the script. And he was exactly right, because once he signed Emma Roberts, who was huge from American Horror Story and Scream 4, and Kiernan Shipka, who's best known at the time for stuff like Mad Men, she played Don Draper's daughter, he immediately got funding for the movie. I could not find a budget for this movie for the life of me, but judging by the fact that they had to film it at a basically abandoned college in Ontario, Canada, and the entire movie takes place there, I'm gonna go ahead and assume it was made for less than a couple $1 million. He says that the school was in such bad shape when they finally started shooting there that there were only 15 kids in attendance, but one benefit they got from that is that they had free reign over the entire campus. They could basically shoot wherever they wanted, which is awesome. And when he was shooting it, he developed two big fundamentals for his filmmaking career. The first is that he understands the importance of a location, and I was so excited to read that in 2024 when every movie seems to be shot in a single location that's usually a house that nobody could even live in, or, you know, a big warehouse with blue walls so they can take the little actor and put them in any location they want, and they think you can't tell, but you definitely can tell, and you definitely can tell even more a few years after the movie comes out because CGI gets better and stuff looks dated, you know? Anyway, the original title of the movie was February, and it did release with that title in other territories, and the reason for that was that he thinks you can make a place feel like a time of the year. And as someone who lives in Michigan, I can tell you with expert knowledge that from the very first frame of this movie, it feels like February. It's cold, it's brutal, it makes you want to wear your winter jacket inside and crank the heat up way too high. The second fundamental he developed is that all of his movies are basically Trojan horses for something deeper. So at first, this seems like a pretty standard possession movie that's just shot really well, but then it eventually becomes a really sad story about grief and loss and how it affects different types of people. Once the movie was finished, he took it to Toronto International Film Festival, and it was picked up for distribution by DirecTV and A24. The big reason for that is A24 was not huge at the time like they are now. This was pre The Witch, this was pre-Hereditary. They didn't have a ton of money to fund their movies, so they would buy them in partnership with DirecTV. DirecTV would show it to subscribers, and then A24 would get the rights, and they could give it a limited theatrical screening and then put it on VOD platforms and make money off of it that way. So it's that weird distribution model that's definitely to blame for the fact that The Black Coat's Daughter was made first but came out after I Am the Pretty Thing That Lives in the House. And unlike his first movie where he had to go out and find actors to make it sellable, once Netflix gave him the budget for this movie, the actors all just started coming to him. That whole process was super overwhelming to him, but it did help him develop his third fundamental, which is give jobs to people you genuinely love working with and people who are going to work hard. He interviewed a bunch of different actors for the lead role of a Mary Shelley-esque writer who kind of goes insane, and he didn't really feel like he jived with any of them until he met Ruth Wilson, who, despite being a pretty famous actor in her own right, was excited about the script when she read it and promised him that she was going to work her ass off on the movie. So he was like, you're in, you got the role. So with two small movies under his belt, Perkins decided it was time to make a big, real theatrical movie with a budget and marketing and everything else that comes along with a theatrical movie. His third movie is called Gretel and Hansel, and it seems like everything went fine on this movie because for the life of me, I cannot find any interviews, I can't find any profiles, I can't find production BTS or anything about it. It seems like he got the money, he made the movie, it made money, it all worked out just fine. It was a big W. I was able to find a budget for this movie, which was $5 million. It made $20 million. It has a pretty good Rotten Tomatoes score. There's really nothing that went wrong from what I can tell on it. The reason I bring it up is because, importantly to his career, it was financially successful, which set him up for the movie that would put him on the map, which is, of course, I can't think of a recent horror movie that had more hype behind it than Longlegs, other than maybe It Chapter 2, Halloween 2018, or Terrifier 3. From the very beginning, this movie had all the hallmarks of a movie built to be successful. First, it was marketed as a serial killer movie inspired by one of the best movies of all time, The Silence of the Lambs. Second, it has a great distributor behind it with Neon Pictures, who's basically been neck and neck with A24 trying to take the crown as the best small horror movie distributor in the world. Third, speaking of Neon, the marketing team over there went absolutely crazy with this movie. They made an ARG where you could decipher letters from the Longlegs killer. They even set up a phone line where you could call a number and hear Longlegs talk to you, which was genuinely creepy. Like, they went all out with this movie. Fourth, this movie has excellent trailers, and they did early screenings for it at a bunch of different festivals, which helped spread word of mouth, and word of mouth is the best marketing because it's completely free. And finally, the last good nail in the coffin, I can't think of a better metaphor for this movie's success, was the fact that Nicolas Cage joined to play Longlegs, the titular killer, and he brought a lot to the movie. Like, they kept him out of the public eye up until its release, and that was a really smart decision. This movie is a culmination of everything Perkins learned making his first three movies, but the most important thing about it is its deeply personal story about parents lying to their kids because they know they trust them, and you know, they do it to protect them, but then the kids figure out the lie later in life and everything comes crashing down. I don't want to dig too deep into it because there's a lot of ways you could interpret this movie, but it's very clear that the whole experience of his parents lying to him as a kid deeply affected him, and Longlegs is him working through it. Another fundamental that reappeared with this movie is how all of his stuff is a Trojan horse for a deeper story. It's really easy to walk into this movie expecting it to be pretty much exactly like Silence of the Lambs because that's how it was marketed, and then being mad when you leave the theater because of the sharp left turn it takes about 2 acts in, then it becomes a completely different story. And I say that because that's kind of how I felt leaving the theater, but I wish I watched interviews with Perkins before I saw it because I would have realized that that was intentional, and it kind of recontextualizes the movie and makes it a lot better in my opinion. See, the one thing you gotta know about Oz Perkins is that above everything else, he just loves movies. And since he's never been blessed with huge budgets or 3-month shoots, he always kind of feels like he's on the back step when he's making them. So to give himself a little bit of an edge, he fills the roster of his crew with a bunch of people that he not only genuinely enjoys working with, but also knows they're gonna work hard and do their job effectively. Everyone who works on an Oz Perkins picture is stoked to be there, they're ready to give it their all, so he can trust them to do their job while he does his. It's kind of like the opposite experience of what Sam Raimi had on the first Evil Dead, where he was trying to do everything and production kept falling farther and farther behind. And if you want to hear more about it, click the video that's on screen now, or go search it after you're done watching this one. He sees movies as collaborative from top to bottom. He doesn't like directors who take all the credit or put their name before the title like John Carpenter's Halloween. He wants everyone to get credit because so many people are involved in the work of making his movies. And on top of that, if people working on his movies have great ideas, he's more than happy to put them in the finished product. We'll start out with the connection to Silence of the Lambs. That all came from the fact that he saw the movie when it came out in theaters and he loved the experience of seeing a great serial killer movie in theaters, so he wanted to remind people of the feeling he had because he assumed they had similar feelings to him back when it came out. But some of the specific shots that call back to the movie directly were inspired by his DP coming up to him and saying, "Hey, this shot in Silence of the Lambs is awesome. We should definitely reference it in the movie." And then he looked at it and said, "You idiot, we can't do that, screw you." No, he said, "That shot is awesome. We should definitely put one like it in our movie." When it comes to Longlegs himself, the look for the character was collaborative as well. Perkins was stressed out trying to find someone to play the role because it's so jacked up, but then Nicolas Cage read the script and called him and was like, "Can I play this character? It seems awesome." And as Perkins puts it, this dude has seen everything. He knows every actor, he knows every movie, he knows every shot, so he was excited to get him on board. And then once they started going over the character, he was more than happy to take input from Nicolas Cage, even though he came on with the intention of just following the script. But the idea of the character being mangled and disfigured by plastic surgery came from Perkins' 15-year-old daughter, and I don't mean like she looks like that. She came up with the idea. She was watching TV one night and an ad came on for Sex and the City, and when Sarah Jessica Parker came on screen, she was like, "She's busted." Perkins loved that, so when he went to go work on the script, he wrote down Longlegs is busted from plastic surgery. Nicolas Cage brought some stuff to the look as well, because when he was a kid, his mom used to paint her face like Chappell Roan, and then she'd hide from him and then turn around and say cuckoo, and it would scare the shit out of him, so he was like, Longlegs should do that, and Perkins was like, yeah, Longlegs should do that. The look for the Longlegs killer is just awesome. It's creepy, it's original, it fits perfectly into the Pacific Northwest setting that the movie has, because, you know, he'd be known in his small town as the local weirdo, but the news would not reach farther out because he lives in the middle of nowhere. And I think setting this movie in the 90s was a really smart decision because it's kind of like the last period in American history where this movie could take place. You know, cell phones were new, they were expensive, they didn't have the internet. And it makes sense for the story because it explains why he gives himself up. He basically has to because time itself and the world and technology have caught up to him and backed him into a corner. And unsurprisingly, the background for the character being a birthday clown came from his real life as well. He didn't have a creepy clown experience. He just, you know, is a parent and he hired a clown for his kid's birthday party, and after the party, he helped the clown carry his stuff to the car, and when he got to the car, he was like, whoa, this thing's a beater. It was full of creepy stuff, and he was like, who the hell did I just invite into my house? And all of that really is what sets Perkins apart from other directors who call back to their favorite movies and it really just ends up feeling derivative. He knows exactly when to take that hard left into making something completely new and original that you've never seen before. And that's exactly what happens in Longlegs when the big reveal happens. It's totally original. And the whole main character being an FBI agent who has a little bit of a premonitional ability or whatever, it's not totally original. It does really remind me of the video game Alan Wake 2. Like, if Sam Lake does not know who Oz Perkins is, they need to connect and work together on Alan Wake 3 because these guys are just made to work together. I mean, watch Longlegs and then play Alan Wake 2 and then tell me I'm wrong. He's also one of the very few directors today that like loves the real world and understands that pulling from it is the only way to make a truly great movie. I don't think you need to be a Mensa candidate to figure out that the plot of this movie is him working through his backstory with his parents keeping secrets from him as a kid. His big X factor as a director is his outlook on life. He's been faced with endless tragedy throughout his life, but instead of letting it make him cynical or jaded, he says, hey man, I'm alive. I may as well do something cool and make an awesome horror movie because it's gonna come to an end one day. I may as well do something with my life while I have it. So when you look at his movies through that lens, it doesn't seem weird anymore that he's so attracted to horror. He just absolutely loves making horror movies. He's obsessed with the idea that the only way to make a truly great movie is to put yourself into it, and where I saw this really play out is with an interview with Daniel Fee, who's a smaller YouTuber who interviews directors. Around the beginning of the interview, Fee mentions that his parents are deaf, and that makes him think about how they interpret horror movies because sound is such a big part of horror movies. And while he does answer all of the questions that Fee has like super excitedly, he keeps coming back to that story saying this.
Start with what is right in front of you. Like, even just hearing you talk about your life, just like the very little slice I've got of your life, it's so rich and it's so profound and touching. Like, I don't give a fuck about somebody who's I can't even make anything up that would be half as interesting as what you've just said about your experience. And people, I think, forget that movies are from a human, they come from a human being. And if they don't come from a human being, then they're kind of nonsense.
It's one thing to say you make movies because you love them, but I feel like a lot of directors are projecting a little bit or just trying to say the right stuff to get people's butts in theater seats. I've just been having this feeling lately when watching new movies or playing video games that none of the people making this stuff are actually excited to be doing it anymore. It's all about the brand or the product or the return on investment, you know, like everything has an HR buzzword attached to it these days, and it just sucks. Movies, books, games, and music all seem to have forgotten that they're supposed to be entertainment at the end of the day. Like, so much stuff seems to be made now, so you can fill out the available games on Xbox Game Pass or fill out the amount of stuff that you can watch on Disney Plus. Like, no one feels like they're making stuff because they love it anymore. But with Oz Perkins, everything is made in service of entertaining you and telling you a good story and showing you something you've never seen before and giving you something to think about when you've left the theater. And he does that by calling back to movies that had the same goal, which is even more impressive. Seeing a dude who's gone through hell for pretty much his entire life not only be excited to talk about a movie he's made, but actually sound like he loved the process of making it was not only refreshing, it was a little bit surprising, if I'm being honest. I try to wrap all these videos up with a takeaway, and this one is simple. You should do things in life that are going to make you happy. And even if you're in a situation where you're working a job that you hate, use it as motivation to do the things that you want to do. The point is, life is short. You can't control the cards that you're dealt. Stuff is going to go wrong. If you sit there being mad and complaining about it, you're not going to be able to get anything done. If you just enjoy the process that life throws at you, you're going to end up a much happier person. So take your life in your hands and do something about it. Anyway, guys, that brings me to the end of this video. As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.